I used to think love failed with a bang, with slammed doors, screaming, dramatic ultimatums and shattered plates on the floor. Something loud enough that the neighbors would remember it for years. In my case, it ended quietly. In a kitchen that smelled like coffee and burnt toast. With my husband saying he needed to talk. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I first met Daniel, I thought he was the safest person in the world. Safe in the way a steady heartbeat is safe, or a warm room on a winter night. I was 26 then, constantly nervous and permanently tired from my job as a nurse. He was 29, a high school history teacher with soft eyes and a voice that made teenagers pay attention. We met at my friend Lauren's birthday picnic. I was late, in my scrubs, smelling faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. He joked that I looked like I had escaped from a medical drama. I laughed harder than the comment deserved, mostly because I hadn't laughed properly in weeks. He listened when I talked about my patients, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't. He told me about his students, the kid who fell asleep in the back row every day because he was working nights at a mechanic shop to help his mom, the girl who wrote essays like she was already at university. When I checked my phone and realized I had a double shift the next morning, he said he didn't know how I did it. He said people like me kept the world from falling apart. I didn't fall in love with him that day. But something inside me loosened. 3 years later, standing under a cheap arch in a botanical garden with my hair pinned up and my cheeks aching from smiling, I said yes when the officiant asked if I would promise to spend my life with him. The sun was bright. My mother cried. Lauren stood beside me, one hand on my elbow, steadying me when my knees threatened to buckle from the surreal weight of the moment. Our wedding photos look like the start of a perfect story. Two people beaming at each other, friends throwing flower petals, everyone pretending they believed in forever. Sometimes I still look at those pictures and wonder when, exactly, the story shifted genres. The first year of our marriage was busy. I moved from night shifts to rotating shifts. He became head of his department at school. We bought a small townhouse on the edge of the city, the kind with beige carpets and an aggressively neutral kitchen. We painted one wall blue just to feel like it belonged to us. We argued about small things, who left dishes in the sink, whose turn it was to take the car for servicing, but we always made up before bed. He would roll closer, wrap an arm around me, and say we were on the same team. I believed him. In our third year, my mother got sick. It was the slow, cruel kind of sickness that doesn't make headlines but quietly rearranges your entire life. I spent my days at the hospital where I worked and my evenings at the hospital where she was admitted. My world shrunk to corridors, antiseptic, the sound of monitors beeping, the rough paper of consent forms beneath my hand. Daniel stepped up at first. He cooked. He did laundry. He drove me when I was too tired to trust myself behind the wheel. He held me when I came home with tears crusted on my cheeks, smelling of other people's suffering. But duty has a way of stretching people thin. By the time my mother died, 18 months later, I felt like I had been hollowed out and left in the sun. The funeral was a blur of flowers and black clothes and people saying things like she's in a better place and stay strong. I stood by her grave with my hands clenched so tightly around the tissue in my fist that my knuckles ached. That night, when the house was finally quiet and everyone had gone home, I curled up on our bed and sobbed, the kind of crying that steals air instead of releasing it. Daniel lay beside me, stiff at first, then relaxed enough to hold me. He said he was sorry. He said he wished he could take the pain away. But something in his voice felt distant, like an echo from the other side of a wall. Grief does that to people, I told myself. It makes everyone sound far away. After the funeral, people stopped calling as much. Life resumed its usual rhythm, for them. For me, time felt wrong. Too fast and too slow at once. I walked around with the sensation that I had forgotten something important in another room and couldn't remember what it was. Daniel went back to school, I went back to the hospital. That was the season when small things began to change. He started spending more time at work. He said the school was introducing a new curriculum, that they needed extra meetings and planning sessions. He joined a committee I'd never heard of before, something about improving student engagement. He came home later, his shirt sleeves rolled up, tie shoved in his pocket. He said he was exhausted. I didn't doubt him. Teaching isn't an easy job. I had seen the way it drained him and filled him at the same time. Still, some nights he didn't come home until nearly 11. When I asked if everything was okay, he would say yes, just grading, just planning, just one more conversation with a student who needed him. We stopped eating together regularly. My shifts didn't help. I might be home at 4 p.m. one day and 11 p.m. the next, but before, we had always tried. Now, I'd find containers in the fridge labeled with sticky notes in his handwriting: "Ate at school, you were sleeping, love you." The words looked right. They just started to feel thin. One Tuesday afternoon, my schedule changed unexpectedly. A colleague offered to cover my second shift so I could go home early. I texted Daniel to say I'd be home by 5 and suggested we cook together. He didn't reply, which wasn't unusual. He couldn't always check his phone during class. The sun was still up when I pulled into our driveway. The sky had that soft gold light that makes everything look kinder than it really is. I remember thinking I'd open all the windows and air out the house, maybe light one of the candles my mother had given me. When I unlocked the door, I heard voices. One of them was his. The other was a woman's. They were low, almost hushed, and I couldn't make out the words at first. My heartbeat quickened. It could have been anyone, a colleague, a neighbor, a parent dropping off something for school. I clung to that thought as I stepped out of my shoes quietly and walked down the hall. The living room was empty, but there were 2 mugs on the coffee table and a cardigan draped over the back of the armchair. It wasn't mine. Their voices came from the kitchen. I stood in the doorway and saw them. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, a familiar crooked half-smile softening his face. Across from him stood a woman I recognized vaguely from photos he'd shown me, a younger English teacher at his school, Emily or Emma or something close to that. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, wisps falling around her face. She held a mug in both hands and laughed at something he'd just said. They weren't touching. There was nothing technically wrong with what they were doing. And yet, there was a closeness in the way they stood, a slightly tilted angle of their bodies, an ease in their eye contact that I hadn't seen in my own kitchen for months. Daniel saw me first. His smile faltered. He straightened, the mug in his hand clinking against the counter. He said, "Hey, wasn't expecting me home so early. Did everything go okay at the hospital?" His tone was bright, too bright. The woman turned, cheeks flushed, and gave me a polite, slightly startled smile. She said she hoped she wasn't intruding, that she had just stopped by to drop off some worksheets, that they got to talking about a student. I nodded mechanically, said it was fine, said I was just surprised. My voice sounded thin in my own ears. Daniel introduced us properly. Her name was Emma. We shook hands. Her palm was warm and slightly damp. They chatted a bit longer, and then she said she should go, that she had papers to grade. She thanked Daniel for the coffee and said it was nice to finally meet me. There was nothing overtly flirtatious in her tone. She seemed friendly. Harmless. When the door closed behind her, I turned to Daniel. I asked why he hadn't told me she was coming over. He said it was last minute. He said she lived nearby and had offered to swing by after school instead of emailing the documents. He said he didn't think it was a big deal. I looked at the 2 empty mugs. At the cardigan left behind. At the way his shoulders were still slightly angled toward the door, as if part of him hadn't fully returned to the room. I said I wished he had mentioned it. He sighed, as if I were being unreasonable, and said I had been so overwhelmed lately that he hadn't wanted to burden me with every small detail of his day. He said it wasn't like he was hiding anything. The sentence hung between us. I let it go. At least, that's what I told him. I changed out of my uniform, washed my face, and started chopping vegetables for dinner. He stood beside me, making small talk, telling me a funny story about a student who had handed in a history paper with half the paragraphs copied from Wikipedia. I smiled when I was supposed to. But a part of me had moved outside of myself, watching from a distance. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake and replayed the scene in the kitchen. The way he'd smiled at her. The way she'd looked at him. The way his voice had sounded lighter than it had in weeks. It could have been nothing. Perfectly innocent. A tired husband making room for kindness in his day. I wanted to believe that. I decided to try. For a while, I succeeded. Weeks turned into months. Emma's name started popping up in his stories more often. He'd mentioned something funny she'd said in the break room, or how she'd come up with a creative lesson plan for her class, or how she really got through to a student he'd been worried about. He insisted they were just friends. Colleagues. Teammates. I noticed that when his phone buzzed in the evenings, he checked it quicker than he used to. Sometimes he smiled at the screen and didn't share the joke. When I asked, he would say it was just a stupid meme from someone at work, not worth repeating. The first time I saw her name light up his screen, it was a Saturday afternoon. We were sitting on the couch, half watching some home renovation show. His phone buzzed between us. He glanced at it, and for a moment, the reflection of the screen flashed in his eyes. I caught her name before he turned it face down. He said it was nothing. I said I hadn't asked. The air between us cooled a few degrees. One evening, I came home late from a brutal double shift. I'd lost a patient that morning and spent the rest of the day trying not to carry the weight of it into every room. By the time I walked through our front door, my entire body ached. The house was quiet, lights off. For a terrifying second, I thought Daniel had left. Then I heard the faint sound of his voice coming from the bedroom. He didn't notice me standing in the hallway. His tone was soft, intimate in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. He said he understood that she was being too hard on herself, that she was an incredible teacher and anyone could see that. He laughed gently at something I couldn't hear, the kind of laugh that sounded like he was smiling with his whole face. I heard Emma's voice through the half-open door, muffled but distinct. She said she didn't know what she'd do without him. I stepped back quietly and leaned against the wall, my hand pressed flat over my chest. I didn't listen to the rest. I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower so loudly it covered almost any other sound, and sat on the closed toilet lid, fully dressed, staring at the tile. I tried to tell myself it was normal for colleagues to care about each other. That he was just being supportive. That she was young and insecure and he was mentoring her. That the intimacy I heard was in my head. But something inside me whispered that this was how it started. Not with hotel rooms and lies about conferences. With words. With comfort. With the kind of emotional dependence that should have been reserved for our marriage. I ignored that whisper as long as I could. Then came the conference. At the start of the spring term, Daniel mentioned a weekend conference for teachers. It was in another city, just 2 hours away. He said the school wanted a few staff members to attend. He'd been invited to present on some work he'd done with at-risk students. I felt genuinely proud of him. This was the kind of recognition he'd always wanted. I told him he had to go, that we'd be fine for a couple of days. A week later, I found the printed conference schedule on the dining table. I glanced at the list of attendees. Emma's name was there too. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was normal. She was an English teacher, there was probably a literacy track. Maybe she had asked to go on her own. Maybe the principal had chosen both of them for entirely separate reasons. When I mentioned it casually that evening, Daniel said of course she was going. The school couldn't spare many teachers, so they were sending the ones most likely to put what they learned into practice. He said it would be nice to have someone he knew there. He said they would barely see each other, the sessions were all day, and he'd probably crash in his room at night. His explanations were logical. Still, the morning he left, I watched him pack with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. He folded his shirts, rolled his socks, checked his laptop charger 3 times. He was happy in a way I hadn't seen in weeks, nervous, excited. At the door, he kissed me and said he'd call every night. He said he'd bring me something back, joked about hotel soap like it was a treasure. I stood in the doorway and waved as he pulled out of the driveway. The car turned the corner and disappeared. The house felt too quiet. That first night, he called around 9 p.m. He sounded tired but upbeat. He said the keynote speaker had been inspiring, that he'd had a great conversation with a principal from another district, that he'd grabbed a late dinner with some teachers from his own school. I asked who. He listed a few names, including Emma's. He said they had all eaten together, that it would have been weird not to, considering they knew each other. I said okay. He asked how my day had been. I said long. We talked for a few minutes more. Before hanging up, he said he missed me and wished I were there. I held on to those words like a rope in the dark. The second night, he didn't call until almost midnight. He said the sessions had run late, that there'd been a mixer after, that he'd lost track of time. His voice sounded fuzzy. Maybe from tiredness. Maybe from drinking. In the background, I heard laughter. A woman's laugh, light and familiar. When I asked where he was, he said he had stepped out into the hallway for some air. He said some of the others were still in the hotel bar, that he'd probably go back in for a bit. I asked if Emma was there. He paused. Then he said yes, of course, she was part of the group. He told me not to worry. I went to bed with my chest tight, my mind playing images it invented just to torture me. The third day, he texted that his phone battery was dying and he might not be able to call before bed. He said he'd see me the next day and tell me everything then. He didn't call. I lay awake until 2 a.m., staring at the dark ceiling, my phone on the pillow beside me. Every time it vibrated, it was just email or some meaningless notification. Around 3 a.m., I finally fell into a restless sleep with one thought circling my mind like a vulture. If nothing was happening, why did it feel exactly like something was? When he walked through the door the next evening, suitcase in hand, smile wide, I knew something had changed. Not in a dramatic way. There were no lipstick stains, no missing shirt buttons, no guilty flinch when I hugged him. But his eyes. They looked past me for a fraction of a second before focusing, like he was traveling back from somewhere far away. He kissed me, gave me a small package, a mug with the conference logo, cheesy and cheap. He told stories about sessions, jokes speakers had made, funny things people had done during icebreakers. He did not mention Emma once. Later that night, when he showered, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his phone on the nightstand. I had never checked his messages before. My mother's voice echoed in my head, from years ago, saying that if you had to go through someone's things to feel safe, something was already broken. But right then, what was broken wasn't my trust in him. It was my trust in my own perception. My fingers hovered over the screen. I picked up the phone. And for the first time in our marriage, I unlocked my husband's phone. To find out who, exactly, he had chosen to be honest with. When he stopped being honest with me. When the phone unlocked, I felt something inside me sink, not sharply, not violently, but like stepping into water deeper than expected. A slow, cold descent. Daniel's home screen was ordinary. A photo of the two of us from last fall, smiling in front of a pumpkin patch, my head leaning on his shoulder. We looked happy. I remember that day vividly, the way he lifted me onto a hay bale, the way he joked about proposing again just to get better pictures. I remember feeling loved. Looking at that image now made my stomach twist. I opened the Messages app. There were threads with colleagues, family, friends. Everything normal. Everything exactly how it should look. Too exactly. I scrolled down the list, searching for her name. Emma. It wasn't there. Not under E. Not under her last name. Not under nicknames. I reopened the list and looked again. Still nothing. My heartbeat quickened. There were ways around visibility, archived messages, deleted threads, hidden apps. But the simplest answer came first. She wasn't texting him on his main phone. Or he had deleted them before coming home. Deleting would have been smart. Calculated. Intentional. He wasn't stupid. He was careful. He knew me, knew I carried doubt like a second skin since my mother died. He also knew how to make me question myself. I checked his email next. Nothing unusual. Work correspondence. Parent meeting reminders. Promotional spam. Everything sanitized. If he was hiding something, he had hidden it well. Deep breath. One more place to look. I opened his photo album. At first glance, everything was normal: trip photos, pictures of our meals, screenshots of silly memes, photos of my cat-shaped slippers he always teased me about. I scrolled until I reached the weekend of the conference. There were pictures of conference rooms, lanyards, name tags, hotel breakfast buffets. Generic. Harmless. Too harmless. Then I found one that didn't fit. A picture taken from an elevator mirror. He was smiling, holding his lanyard. But behind him, leaning against the wood-paneled wall, half out of frame, was a familiar shape. Long hair in a messy bun. A plaid scarf. A hand holding a takeaway coffee cup. Emma. The photo wasn't incriminating. Not in any literal way. It could have been innocent. But the way she stood, close enough to be reflected but far enough to avoid being centered, felt intentional. Like she knew she wasn't supposed to be in the picture but didn't want to be entirely out of it. A soft nausea rose in my throat. I checked the timestamps. It was taken at 11:38 p.m. He had told me he was going to bed early that night. My chest tightened as the truth formed, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, devastating certainty of a diagnosis delivered in a calm tone. He lied. Not by mistake. Not out of forgetfulness. But deliberately. I locked his phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. Then I went into the bathroom and threw up. The week that followed was suffocating in the most mundane way. Daniel acted normal. Painfully normal. He made coffee in the mornings, humming softly while buttering toast. He texted me during his lunch break saying he missed me. He kissed my forehead when he walked through the door each evening. He asked what I wanted to watch. He rubbed my back when I said my shoulders hurt. He studiously avoided saying Emma's name. I answered him with the same level of normalcy. I didn't accuse him. I didn't confront him. I observed. Emma's name popped up more often now, slipped casually into stories, mentioned in passing, always wrapped in harmless context. He said she was frustrated with her lesson plan. He said she was worried about a student. He said she was considering applying for a fellowship. Not a word about the conference. Not a word about the late-night elevator. Not a word about their phone calls. The omission was its own confession. Every evening, after he fell asleep, I lay awake and replayed little things. The softness in his voice when he talked to her on the phone that week my mother died. The cardigan she left in our kitchen. How they stood in the kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, aligned, almost mirrored, as if their bodies had already learned a rhythm that didn't include me. The picture from the elevator. The picture was the knife. The tiny, gleaming blade disguised as nothing. It said everything they were too cowardly to admit. 10 days after the conference, the dam finally broke. It was late on a Friday night. I had worked a brutal rotation, 3 back-to-back 12-hour shifts. The kind of days where your feet ache so badly you feel each bone as its own separate entity. I texted Daniel in the afternoon saying I might fall asleep at the table and asked if he'd ordered dinner. He didn't respond. Not unusual. But something felt off. When I finally walked through the door at 9:30 p.m., exhausted and smelling like bleach and anxiety, I noticed 3 things immediately. His shoes weren't by the door. The lights were off, but not completely, just the kitchen light was glowing faintly down the hallway. His phone was on the coffee table. His phone was never on the coffee table. He kept it close, always. I walked into the kitchen. Daniel was sitting at the table, hands folded, head lowered. He looked like he had been carved from the dim yellow light above him, soft edges, quiet tension. He said we needed to talk. My lungs constricted. I sat across from him, placing my bag on the floor slowly, as if motion itself could delay whatever was coming. He didn't look at me. Not at first. When he finally lifted his gaze, his eyes were red, like he'd been crying or drinking or both. He said he couldn't keep pretending. He said the last few months had changed him. He said he was confused. He said he didn't feel like himself. He said he didn't know how to talk to me anymore. He said he didn't know how to stop hurting me. Each sentence felt like a stone dropped into my lap. Finally, I asked the question sitting like a shard of glass between us. Is it about her? He didn't ask who her was. He closed his eyes. That was my answer. He said he never meant for anything to happen. He said they had become close at work, closer during the new curriculum planning, closer still during the conference. He said she made him feel seen. He said he didn't know how to stop it once it started. He said he felt young with her. Alive. Like he mattered. He said he didn't know how to talk to me while I was grieving. I sat in silence. He kept talking. He said he hadn't slept with her, yet. He said he wasn't sure what they were, only that they were something. He said she didn't pressure him. He said he didn't know what he wanted. I felt my face go numb. He said he still loved me. That he cared deeply for me. That he wasn't sure he was in love with me anymore. The cliché of it burned. He reached across the table, slowly, as if approaching an injured animal. I didn't move. He said he hoped we could take time apart. He said maybe space would help. He said maybe we'd find our way back. He said maybe too many times for it to mean anything. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sob. I wanted to ask how he could watch my mother die, watch me crumble, and still find someone else's smile easier to reach for. But exhaustion hollowed everything inside me. So instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Did you love me while you were falling for her? He looked devastated. He whispered yes. The word didn't comfort me. It crushed me. Because it meant love wasn't enough. Not to save us. Not to keep him. Not to keep me from breaking. I stood, walked to the bedroom, and began packing a small bag. Clothes. Toothbrush. Scrubs. Shoes. The necklace my mother left me. When I came back out, he was still at the table, hands in his hair. He asked where I was going. I said somewhere he wasn't. I said I didn't know how long. I said I needed space too, but not the kind that made room for someone else. He cried. I didn't. I left the house in silence, closing the door gently behind me. No slamming. No shouting. No cinematic devastation. Just the soft click of a marriage ending in the quietest way imaginable. I didn't go far that night. There's something humiliating about leaving your own home with a half-packed bag and nowhere certain to land. All I could think about was how tired I was, tired down to my bones, to my heartbeat, to the part of me that still hoped he'd run after me even though I knew he wouldn't. I drove to the only place that felt remotely safe. My mother's house. It had been sitting empty for months. I still hadn't finished sorting through her things. The electricity was on, the water worked, and the room still smelled faintly of her lavender detergent. When I stepped inside, it felt like stepping back into a version of myself before everything got so heavy. I set my bag down, turned on one dim lamp in the living room, and sat on the floor. Shock has a strange way of muting pain. It wasn't until the next morning that everything hurt. I woke stiff and cold from falling asleep on the carpet. My phone was full of unread messages, Daniel's name repeated over and over. Please call me. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. We need to talk. I'm losing my mind not knowing where you are. Please don't shut me out. At the very end. I'm sorry. 15 letters that meant nothing and everything. I turned the phone face down on the coffee table and went to shower. The water was scalding, but it didn't wash anything away. I felt his hands in the kitchen that night, the way he looked at the table instead of at me, the way his voice trembled when he said he didn't know what he wanted. He knew. People always know. They just don't want to say it out loud. Afterward, wrapped in an old towel I'd left at my mother's house, I finally let myself cry properly. Not the restrained, quiet tears of the night before. The kind that come with choking breaths and shaking limbs. I cried for her, for me, for the life I thought I'd been building. I cried for the woman who thought loyalty was protection. 2 days passed before I answered Daniel's call. He sobbed the moment he heard my voice, saying he hadn't slept, barely eaten, that he felt sick with guilt, that he didn't want to lose me. His voice cracked so badly I had to sit down. He asked if he could see me. Not to convince me of anything, he claimed. Just to talk. We agreed to meet at a small park near my mother's house. Neutral ground. When he arrived, he looked smaller. Like he had deflated. His hair was unwashed, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes red and swollen. He reached for me, but I stepped back. He nodded, accepting the boundary. He said he had ended things with Emma. I asked when. He hesitated. That was my answer. He said he told her the conference had been a mistake. That he cared about her but couldn't keep doing this. That he loved me. That he was terrified he had thrown everything away. I didn't react. He kept talking. He said he had been drowning after my mom died, that he didn't know how to be what I needed, that he felt invisible and guilty and ashamed. He said Emma made him feel lighter. Younger. Less burdened. Hearing my grief described as a burden knocked the air from my lungs. I asked him if he had ever considered telling me any of this before it turned into betrayal. He said no. He said he didn't want to hurt me. He said he didn't want me to think I wasn't enough. The irony almost made me laugh. I was enough. He just didn't want the version of life that required effort. Love, for him, had been a place to rest. Not a place to grow. He said he wanted to come home. I said he couldn't. Not now. He asked if that meant never. I said I didn't know. But I did know. When I looked at him, I didn't see my husband. I saw a man I had loved deeply, who had let go first, quietly, long before I noticed. A week passed. Then 2. He texted every day. Long messages, short messages, sometimes just "I'm thinking of you." I replied occasionally, politely, without warmth. He kept telling me he was working on himself, going to therapy, journaling, eating better. It didn't move me. Pain changes love. It doesn't erase it. It mutates it. I wasn't healing in a beautiful, empowering, cinematic way. I was healing like someone stitching their own skin, messy, slow, clumsy, imperfect. I slept too much or not at all. I ate cereal for dinner. I sat in the backyard at midnight listening to nothing. But little by little, I found myself again. I went back to work. The hospital felt grounding in a way home didn't. Patients needing me gave me purpose. Pain is easier to process when it isn't just your own. I saw friends again. Lauren brought takeout and refused to let me apologize for crying while eating noodles. My coworkers covered shifts when I needed a break. People were kinder than I expected. For the first time in years, I learned how to be alone without being lonely. 2 months after I left, Emma emailed me. Seeing her name made my fingers go cold, but I opened it. Her message was long, apologetic, but not in a begging way. She wrote that she never meant to hurt me, that she thought she and Daniel were filling a gap I wasn't aware existed. She said she understood now how delusional that was. She said she felt ashamed. That she was transferring schools. That she hoped one day I'd see she wasn't a monster, just a flawed person who let loneliness justify terrible choices. I didn't respond. Not because I wished her ill. But because forgiving her wasn't a task. It wasn't even a goal. It was a possibility for a future version of me. One I hadn't reached yet. Daniel tried one last time. He showed up at the townhouse one evening with flowers I didn't want and eyes that begged in ways words couldn't. He said he had made the worst mistake of his life. He said he still believed we could fix things. He said he loved me. He said he would do anything. I believed him. I truly did. And yet, believing someone wants you is not the same as believing you belong with them. I told him the truth gently. I loved him. I probably always would. But I couldn't build a marriage with someone who had already proven they didn't know how to stay. Not when things got messy. Not when I needed them most. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. But I wasn't coming back. His face crumpled. He nodded. He said he understood. He didn't. But he accepted it. He kissed my forehead one last time. A gesture that felt like a ghost of our former life. And walked away. I didn't watch him leave. Life didn't magically get better after that. But it got quieter. And quieter sometimes means safer. I started taking morning walks. I repainted the living room. I threw out my mother's old lavender detergent because the scent hurt too much. I bought a new mug, the cheap kind with a chipped edge, and made coffee every morning in the sunlight instead of the dark. Months later, I met a colleague for brunch. She asked casually how I was doing. For once, I didn't give the polite answer. I said I was healing. Not healed. Not fine. Healing. And that felt honest. Before leaving, she hugged me and said something that stayed with me. You didn't lose him. You released him. I think that was true. I didn't lose a husband. I released a man who didn't know how to love me in the dark parts of life. And I found myself waiting on the other side. Not whole. Not complete. But real. And finally, free.